As you know, my local hustings was put on with no fanfare, which meant that the questions I was going to ask never got asked. But because people are still campaigning and may even be at the polling station on election day, here's some questions you might want to ask. Number one, a lot of rhetoric has been spouted about having to make difficult decisions and hard choices when explaining why cuts have to be made or pledges can't be kept. Can you define what you mean by difficult decisions and justify your answer without resorting to the economically illiterate and misleading analogies to having maxed out the country's credit card or household budgets? Number two, given that the three main parties have shown themselves to be entirely untrustworthy, duplicitous and/or corrupt, how are you planning to rebuild trust in politicians? And, more importantly, can we believe what you say? Right. Question 3 was about my constituency, so there will be some gaps. Question 4. Many local authorities have become bankrupt in the last few years. Will your party be taking legal proceedings against the councillors and officers who caused the bankruptcies? Question 5. The two-child benefit cap is going to plunge hundreds of thousands of households into poverty. Given that the demographic makeup of the UK population is towards the elder end and the birth rate has dropped, will your party be keeping the two-child benefit cap and justify your answer, giving it would lead to an economic time bomb for the future? Question 6. During the period 2010 to 2015, over 100,000 benefit claimants died prematurely due to the cruel benefit sanctions and assessment processes, many of them sick and disabled. The figures became such a disgrace that the Department for Work and Pensions stopped counting premature deaths of claimants. Given that sanctions on sick and disabled people don't get them back into work, and that the disability assessments have cost the country more than they've saved, will your party scrap the disability assessments, except where fraud is actually suspected? And according to the Health Inequalities Lives Cut Short paper by UCL Institute of Health Equity, published January 2024, the report attributed 148,000 deaths directly attributed to austerity measures implemented by the coalition government from 2010, comparing them with pre-existing levels. Just to give you slightly more information to back up the original claim. Question 7. On the 17th of May 2024, it was reported that the Department for Work and Pensions published figures stating that personal independence payment fraud stood at 0% in the financial year ending 2024, and disability living allowance fraud was just 0.1%, which was rounded to 0 million. Given those figures, will your party be rolling back on plans to overhaul the PIP/DLA system? If not, justify that. Question 9. Evaded tax is a significant problem in the UK. Are you going to work on closing the legal but immoral tax loopholes to fund public services? Question 11. The job of an MP is to represent the views of their constituents in Parliament. If your constituents' views differ from your own or your party's, whose views do you give precedence? your constituents or your party? Question 12. Both main parties have been engaging in culture war issues that mean absolutely nothing to the person in the street. When are you going to grow up and actually do the job you're overpaid to do? Question 13. What is your party going to do to address the cost of living crisis? Sensible answers only, not the fairy tales we keep getting. 14. The Tories have made no secret of their disdain for the human rights legislation the UK has been signed up to for decades, and in fact had a hand in creating. What are you going to do to protect the human rights that our forebears fought and died to protect? 15. Successive Tory and Labour governments have watered down or eroded workers' rights for decades. What are you going to do to redress this appalling situation? Question 16. The Data Protection and Information Bill currently moving through the House of Lords would give the Department for Work and Pensions unprecedented powers to monitor the financial activity of benefit claimants, which is likely to breach privacy law and could amount to unlawful discrimination. If you become my MP, will your party continue with these measures, or will you scrap the plans? And justify your answer. Question 17. On the 10th of January 2024, DWP senior civil servant Peter Schofield told MPs that he hopes DWP's use of artificial intelligence in detecting fraud among benefit claimants will not lead to a repeat of the Post Office Horizon scandal. Given the possibility of such another major issue with the use of AI, would you recommend scrapping its use in the DWP? If not, justify your answer. Question 18. Given the cost in human lives of austerity and the mishandling of the COVID pandemic, will you press for legal proceedings against those responsible for the unnecessary deaths? If not, justify why not. 19. On the 28th of March 2024, it was reported that the Cabinet Office had finally found a DWP report that showed that the additional difficulties faced by vulnerable universal credit claimants. A follow-up report that the DWP was forced to release, How Effective is Support for Vulnerable Universal Credit Claimants, revealed significant flaws at the heart of the universal credit system and how the DWP supports claimants it sees as vulnerable. Will you scrap the scheme or at least pause it until the flaws have been resolved? If not, justify your answer. Question 20. With the fact that voter fraud amounted to a handful of cases and even fewer convictions in the last general election, and given that Jacob Rees-Mogg admitted that voter ID requirements was a voter suppression tactic that backfired on the Tories, will you scrap this discriminatory voter requirement? If not, why not? 21. Here's a good one. Who's funding your campaign other than your party, and where does your party get the money to fund their part of the funding of your campaign? 22. Since 2010, the Tories have been blaming the last Labour government for trashing the economy and forcing them to use austerity measures. In this election, Labour are blaming the Tories for crashing the economy and have already watered down their spending commitments and giving indications that they will be cutting welfare. Are you going to keep this stupid cycle going, or will one party actually show some balls and do something different? 23. Recently, we had our first flight to Rwanda, taking the first migrants out of the country. How surprised would you be to learn that the taxpayer had to pay the migrant to go to Rwanda. Not just the fare, but an actual inducement to go. And that the migrant was already willing to go to Rwanda anyway. Is this really good value for money? And the final one, 24. Ignoring your own personal feelings on the rights or wrongs of the legal position taken by the courts. Given that the International Court of Justice has ruled that there is a plausible case against Israel for genocide, the real possibility of arrest warrants being issued by the International Criminal Court, and the possibility of criminal proceedings against members of Parliament stemming from the legal complaint and associated dossier being investigated by the Metropolitan Police War Crimes Division, will your party, 1, comply with any arrest warrants issued by the ICC, and 2, bring the full force of the law against any MPs who are found to have committed war crimes with their unwavering support for Israel? That should stick the cat amongst the pigeons. If you do use any of those questions, if you get the chance to, then do let me know in the comments what kind of responses you got, because I could do with a laugh.